They say they're playing with fire, and it's a fire that could wipe out civilization. Or if you don't credit that, you just say, well, actually, you say it's going to save the world, that it's going to create this unbelievable abundance. Would you want to leave control of that technology in the hands of 5 companies with no public control whatsoever? Why in the world? You're basically saying you're giving control over all of the world's wealth to 5 giant companies, succumbing to whatever authoritarian demands he imposes, and then paying for them trivial amounts of tribute, which are giant for regular people, but nothing for them. Of course, I mean, plainly, it's overtly coercion. For me, it's the corporate power problem. Is a small number of companies that have gigantic informational control, unparalleled ability to affect what every human being thinks.
Hey, Robert, welcome to Beyond the Bite. It is wonderful to have you in the studio.
It's great to be with you.
Absolutely. So, Robert, you are the CEO of Public Citizen. Before we dive into the really the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about today, tell me a little about Public Citizen, about what you do at Public Citizen.
Sure. Well, Public Citizen was founded more than 50 years ago by Ralph Nader. We work on a really broad range of issues, everything from AI to democracy to drug safety to international trade. The unifying theme of this really broad agenda is a focus on corporate power, and right now a focus on fighting back against authoritarianism. We do litigation, we do deep research, we do lobbying, we do mobilizing.
Amazing. I appreciate that we have organizations like Public Citizen today. I think, we are starting to see power be concentrated in fewer hands. And I'm not just talking about political power. I also see that in terms of financial power. I mean, we're coming upon a time when we're going to see our first trillionaire. So it's very important that we check this. And then, of course, technological power, Robert. So that's kind of one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today is we are, when President Trump first took office, I think there was a picture that was in the news where it showed the top tech CEOs all lined up in a row at his inauguration. And, I think the media had a lot of fun with that. I think a lot of people had a lot of fun with it. But there was something behind that. And I think we're seeing that now is we're seeing that the technology companies are really, really heavily involved in government and in politics, more so than we've ever seen before. Do you see a danger in that? What kind of danger are you seeing right now when it comes to technology and AI and politics?
Well, for sure. I mean, it goes way beyond AI. That picture was important because it was emblematic of a decision by Silicon Valley, including companies that had been perceived to be liberal, and maybe even had been, to make common cause with Donald Trump. They decided they were going to ally with him rather than fight him. That meant succumbing to whatever authoritarian demands he imposes. It meant paying for them trivial amounts of tribute, which are giant for regular people, but nothing for them. And in return, they anticipated receiving massive direct benefits on everything from AI policy to international trade policy, and then broader things too, like what's tax policy going to look like? What are we going to do? Do we care about having a trillionaire or multi-hundred billion dollar billionaires around? Do we care about companies that are valued more than most countries? Do we think that's a problem? And they bet, wasn't much of a bet really, that if they sucked up to Trump and gave him a little bit of money, they could attain the policies that advance their interests, but really are coming at the expense of the rest of the country and the world. And so far, that's exactly what's happening.
Now, do you see, besides the problem that the technology companies now are posing in that regard, do you see a problem with what Trump is doing in terms of, especially with his most recent executive order, where he's essentially enabling these tech companies to have, well, I guess more unfettered innovation because, they don't have to worry about all the different states. I mean, we've seen a bunch of states already try to limit AI innovation, and I think Trump's executive orders is really meant to stop that from happening. How do you see this? This back and forth between, well, we need to be able to technologically innovate to stay ahead, but at the same time, we need to be able to govern and police AI better.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't use the characterization you did, and I reject the trade-off. So I wouldn't say that the states are limiting innovation any more than a rule that says a car has to drive straight and not veer into pedestrians every now and then is limiting innovation. It's actually, if you think about that example, the regulation is actually driving innovation to make sure that the car is safe. And the very modest regulation we're seeing at the state level and should see at the federal level is designed to promote innovation, but making sure it's innovation that works for people and not just the profit interests of the big companies. What Trump is trying to do is, with this executive order, is preempt all the efforts at the state level to impose some common sense standards on AI companies and on the use and implementation of AI tools. What's going on at the states is pretty modest. It's very important, but it's pretty modest so far. And we know it's not crimping the companies at all because they're doing exactly what they want to do. And their share value is soaring despite this allegedly burdensome regulation that Trump is trying to rescue them from. The good news is that the executive order doesn't deliver what it claims to. The president cannot unilaterally override state regulatory innovation and enforcement. Congress could. And the president is trying to at least chill the states from taking action and threaten that the Department of Justice will launch probably baseless lawsuits if states adopt new regulation of AI, and threatening illegally to condition some federal funds based on whether or not states are adhering to his no AI regulation agenda. So it's part of an ongoing conversation and kind of ongoing fight that's going on about whether there should be federal preemption. This is not the end of the story by any means. I think there will be litigation over the executive order. The only thing holding back the litigation is, well, does it actually have an impact? If it doesn't actually have an impact, then no one has a case.
It's not worth going after.
To the extent we can show it does have an impact, it's going to be sued, and I think it's going to be defeated.
Yeah, and I actually agree with you. I mean, on Beyond the Bite, on this show, we talk a lot about the importance of not just innovation for innovation's sake, but really wise innovation, making sure that we're doing so in a way that protects humans and that enhances the lives of humans. So that's very, very important. And I think that states essentially being allowed to put the brakes on that in a way that is state specific based on the different environments, I think is very, very, very important. But I wanted to play devil's advocate, because this argument that I pointed, that you said was I correctly so, is not a great argument. This idea of, we don't want to limit our innovation because we need to be ahead in the game. I wanted to play devil's advocate on that, because that is the argument that's often used when it comes to talking about policy. One thing I do want to point out is that China has nationalized their technology policy, and to a certain degree, I feel like that puts them ahead. Do you think that that has something to do with it? The fact that because they are able to nationalize their policy, that they are potentially ahead in the tech game, or do you think that that's still not a great argument that we can be making? I mean, because we do really want to stay competitive on the global space when it comes to technology and AI. That is, I think, important for us as Americans. But I of course, we question the way we're doing it right now. But do you think that there even can be an argument made for that?
Nope. I mean, I actually thought what you're going to say is China has more stringent regulation of AI than the United States does. So that's what I thought you meant by policy, and that is true. So,
but
China,
it's national. It's a nationalized policy. Like they are in complete control.
Top down, government control. They're not so worried about imposing restrictions on AI as the United States is, with its allegedly, overweening state that's controlling these giant corporations. So, no, I don't think so. And also, there's the rules that are in place in the states right now. They're primarily being discussed. I mean, the first big set of rules that almost every state has adopted makes it illegal and a crime to have non-consensual, intimate deepfake images of people. Right?
Yeah.
In what world is that inhibiting innovation that we care about? Half the states have rules prohibiting political deepfakes that might undermine elections. Does nothing to limit innovation. States are
Yeah.
now starting to look at rules dealing with chatbots and emotionally entangling conversations with children. And we've seen a number of these high-profile cases where the chatbot has led kids in conversations that have resulted in them killing themselves. So these horrible
Yeah.
tragedies. But there's a broader social experiment going on. Like imposing restrictions on that does nothing in any meaningful way to limit innovation. There are a couple states that have looked at broad standards about existential risk, and they're really modest restraints given the scale of what the companies say is the dangers they pose. So there is just, theoretically, the government could impose some restrictions that might meaningfully inhibit innovation. And you might say that's a good idea or a bad idea based on what we're talking about. But in fact, practically what's in place is so modest that there's no consequential restriction on what they're doing at all. It's plain that there should be. They say they're playing with fire, and it's a fire that could wipe out civilization. So why would we entrust the people who are telling us that their technology threatens humanity?
Yeah.
And we know they're profit-driven.
Yeah. Yeah. Sam Altman has gone on
That's
to say
crazy.
that, Sam Altman himself has gone on to say that he thinks that AI might be the thing that destroys the world, and that's scary to hear that from one of the top CEOs of these AI companies. So I completely
And
agree with you.
even if you don't credit that,
Yeah.
or if you don't credit that, you just say, well, actually, they say it's going to save the world, that it's going to create this unbelievable abundance. Are you going to
Do you
really
believe that?
Let's imagine that's true.
Yeah.
No. But let's imagine it's true. Would you want to leave control of that technology in the hands of 5 companies
No,
with
absolutely not.
no public control whatsoever? Why in the world? You're just basically saying you're giving control over all of the world's wealth to 5 giant companies. How is that sensible policy? So you wouldn't want to do it in that, even if you believe either the worst they say or the best that they promise. If the technology is anything like the capability of anything remotely like what they claim, it cannot be it cannot just be left to private corporate control. Not if we want to have a world worth living in.
Yeah. Do you think if this executive order pressures states, right, through this broadband funding that Trump has talked about, do you think that is functionally a form of coercion? Even if the courts later strike it down, I mean, do you think that that's sort of it's almost like the federal government's muscling the states, trying to muscle them around?
It's overtly coercion. That's the whole point. It's intended to be coercive. They would be happy to say that. Yes, they're trying to prevent states from doing what they would otherwise do based on a threat we think plainly illegal to withhold federal money that the states are otherwise due. Yeah, it's intended to be coercive.
Yeah, and this is something that I think is really insidious in the government today, and I think that money is making it a lot easier. But I also, so this is a I'm a technologist, not a politician, so I can't speak to the politics in the same way that you can. But what do you think is really happening here? Is it just Trump is helping his very rich friends, be able to have all the playground that they need in the United States? Do you think it's just that simple, or do you think that there really is something to helping these tech companies, because that's our competitive advantage right now? I mean, I really want to try to sort of look at this from both sides and see could there be something more than just plain old corruption here at play?
No, I don't think so. So I think there's layers to this. So the person driving this inside the Trump administration is David Sachs, who's an AI investor. So he's directly personally benefiting. He's completely personally networked with all the companies, and he's trying to deliver for them. And there's a faction of Silicon Valley that has a very authoritarian view, abandoning all the sort of libertarian tendencies that sort of grew up around tech, with a really pro-surveillance, pro-central power, pro-corporate power, pro-total deregulation. And he seems to be emblematic of that, and he's doing his best to impose it. There are factions in the administration who are somewhat opposed to that because they actually oppose big tech, but he's prevailed, and he's prevailed by dealing directly with the president, and because these companies are lavishing wealth on the president, personally, his wife, his super PACs, the White House ballroom, all these channels of money. So I think that's what's going on. Some of the tech people are not happy with David Sacks' proposal because, number one, they understand that the EO, a unilateral EO, doesn't have legitimate authority and will fail to preempt the states. And number two, the more sophisticated people understand the idea that you would have federal preemption of state regulation with no federal standard whatsoever is a preposterous policy and pretty hard to achieve. So the more sophisticated version will offer some meaningless, light touch regulation authorized, created by Congress in exchange for congressionally mandated preemption. And that's what the more sophisticated companies are working for. Apparently, some of them are upset with Sachs because they're getting in the way of that. But if they achieve that, it's also going to be because of their political influence and their money spending, and not because of policy. Now, I don't think there's any way in which it makes sense to say, unless you're an ideologue, because history is really rich on this. Corporations always claim that regulation is going to inhibit innovation. They always claim it's going to undermine U.S. competitiveness. They always claim the U.S. is going to do more and someone else is going to outdistance us. Always. They always claim it. Every industry always says it, and it's never, ever, when you look at the facts, proven true. And it won't be true in this case either. Actually, what you find is that regulation facilitates innovation and functioning markets. So if you were actually worried about, and I think if you look at what the Biden administration did, which was not hardcore regulation and no statutes at all, but an executive order that tried to sort of grapple around the issues, that was intended, that was explicitly pro-AI innovation, but trying to figure out creative ways to deploy AI to advance governmental interests, to carry out governmental functions, but also recognizing the widely acknowledged risks and harms of AI and trying to mitigate them modestly. And I think that's a pro AI policy. There's a lot more you could do with a statutory framework than they could do through an executive order. But that's what, if you care about AI and you're not just caring about corporate profits, then, and it's also weird to say you care about the technology inherently without regard to its impact on people. But even if you do, if your focus isn't how can we make a handful of corporations the most money possible, or how can we advance this technology in ways that serves and benefits humanity, then I think, of course, you want some regulation and you want some government direction. And you also want some government support for things that aren't just the handful of top companies to develop and deploy the technologies.
I think we have a real problem today in the United States when it comes to tech. I mean, this technology has certainly changed the game for education. It has changed the game in a lot of ways for the future of work. And I know that we really talk about the importance of the human aspect of this technology and how we use it as humans. But I don't think that as a country we figured that out yet. And in an ideal world, I think that the federal government would actually be a cooperative participant in figuring this out on a national level. But as I think you've pointed out, and as we're seeing, it doesn't look like the interests are really there for the people as much as it is for the companies. And that's really the scary thing. In an ideal world, Robert, what do you think, what would a federal government that works for the people, what kinds of initiatives would we be doing right now as a country, and also to avoid the potential issues of having patchwork laws for all the different states? Because I think that's another aspect of this that is worrisome, is that if we have this patchwork laws, it's going to be difficult for us to, as a country, advance. What can we do in an ideal world to make this better?
Yeah, again, I mean, the patchwork thing, there's just no evidence to support that. So it's like it sounds like it's an issue, but when you look at what's actually happening and what's being proposed, it doesn't hold up. So I'm not worried about the patchwork. But still, you wouldn't want to rely on. You need states because the federal government. Because it's actually states innovate, right? So we have 50 states, and they can test different approaches, and so you learn different things. It's actually a positive thing that it's not all one form standard. And also, the federal government can't act quickly enough, and the states, not universally but collectively, are more nimble. So new problems emerge, and a state sort of experiments with approach to it, and then it could be federalized. In any case. Leaving aside sort of state-federal question, what should the federal government do? It's definitely not one thing. I think it probably involves a sort of spirit and approach to dealing with both the opportunities and the risks, and recognizing the concentrated power that's just, to go back to the frame you're raising at the beginning. I think one starting point is you cannot have just a handful of companies controlling the technology. And whether others are sort of deploying it or building apps on top of it, that's fine. But you cannot have just a small number of companies between the control of the LLMs and the cloud. It's too much concentrated power. So you've got to deal with both breaking that apart, encouraging more competition, and creating public sector alternatives where you can't. Like, there's no reason that the cloud has to be or controlled. There easily could be a public version, or at least some public alternative to it. That's one piece. I think you want to deal with identifiable risks, not sort of real term identifiable risks. And some of them you say, okay, we want to put safeguards in place to restrict or limit the risk. In some cases, you might say, this is just too risky to move forward. We got to hold off till we understand what's going on. So I think, we can sort of look back on the social media experiment and the impact on teenagers, and not great. And we're now seeing this rollout of chatbots, which is better than me. That's a term we're not going to be using for very long. Chatbots is going to be replaced by agents or avatars or whatever, and something after that. They're going to be increasingly more human seeming. Yeah. And the idea that we're just going to let companies do that and insert it into kids' lives, leaving aside adults for now, and really with this massive social experiment, there's really no reason to think it's going to go well. Like, why? Why would we let that happen? Before just saying, hold on. We got to understand this before we just unfurl it and inflict it on children. Now, that's not going to stop any innovation. You're still going to the companies can still develop their LLMs. They can still sort of do whatever they're going to do to integrate voice and image and whatever. But inserting it into sort of children's social lives on a mass scale, we just don't need to do that. It's a bad idea. And effective government would just say, we're not doing that. We're going to have a precautionary principle. We're not going to do that until we test it and make sure actually it's safe. And we're going to figure out how it's safe, whatever that means. Time limits, specific purposes,
age limits,
not letting them seem too, not the agents seem too human, whatever it is. There's a lot of identifiable possible interventions. But I think the idea that we're just going to figure that out first, not second, first. That would be something you do. And then, there's some hard questions that I don't claim to have expertise on about some of the more systemic, catastrophic risks, which I think are of different. There's a wide array. There's some of this stuff, like the science fiction stuff. I'm not sure that's untrue. I don't know that it is true. The companies seem to think it's true. So that makes that, partly that's sort of touting how powerful this stuff is. But we got to at least understand those things. There are other catastrophic risks that are plainly real, like the ability to use AI tools, for bad actors to use AI tools to unleash, massive harm. We got to kind of grapple with that right away. And there's something where government's going to try to use it for dangerous purposes, including for
surveillance and
AI or weaponry.
Data collection.
We should have and we should have a global. Maybe you could ban this before it starts, even though it's the door. We're almost out the door on that one, unfortunately.
So
there's
lethal
a long
autonomous
list of
weapon
things, and then
systems and things like that.
And then that's just sort of on the generative AI side. If we sort of go back to the sort of decisional AI and the reliance on algorithms to make all kinds of decisions that are leaving human hands and often have bad underlying basis or reflect social racism or different kinds of discrimination, or are being used to price discriminate, micro price discriminate. There's a whole series of issues in that space as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
as you know, like this is a broad technology and it's a big deal and it requires all kinds of governmental intervention.
100%. And, AI is 70 years old. I mean, it's been around since the 1950s. But of course, I think the reason it not the reason, but one of the kind of the big turning points was when ChatGPT was released. I mean, I think this is what thrust AI into the mainstream. And to this day, I think that the day that ChatGPT was released, it really it changed things, and not necessarily for the better. I mean, all of a sudden, every teacher was like, well, now what do we do? It's like when the calculator was first invented, but this is like times 10. And I think that has now that the tech has sort of become right in entered our society, it has already hacked our society. We now have to do something with it. We all have to retrain. We all have to learn. We all have to figure out, well, what do we do now? So my question to you actually is, should we be more worried about corporate capture or this potential for government overreach? Because I think now corporations are the ones that are going to start putting out these, tools and different tech devices and apps and things that we can do. But then the government's going to have to respond in a way that, shapes the narrative for the entire country. Which one is more concerning to you?
For me, it's the corporate power problem. I mean, it's a difficult challenge in an authoritarian moment. So at the end of the day, we have to have a functioning democracy, right? So if we have an authoritarian government with powerful tools, that's terrifying. We have to make the democracy work. But a functioning democracy still has risks for abuse. But the democratic checks and balances and controls and decentralized power offset that. And you have to have governmental power to offset concentrated corporate power. And I think you're asking the right question, because it's nothing to do with like the free market and all these kind of imaginary constructs. It's a small number of companies that have gigantic informational control, unparalleled ability to affect what every human being thinks, sees, believes, contemplates, unfathomable surveillance capacity, and unparalleled in human history riches.
Yeah.
So the only thing that can offset that is the government, and we have to have the government to do it.
Do you think that our government is in danger right now? I mean, you talked about how corporate culture or corporate capture is really the bigger issue to worry about, and I agree with you. But do you think at the same time, because of that and because of the concentration of power, that our system of government is in danger?
Well, it's in danger. There's a squeeze in the context of what we're talking about from multiple sides. So part of it is the government being captured by the corporations. There's a version of that for sure going on, and that goes back to that picture of the 5 CEOs at the inauguration, and that's only been worsened and furthered in the 11 months of the Trump presidency. We do have an actually authoritarian government that is using any available technology to surveil the country and carry out a really cruel and aggressive agenda. Most obviously and viciously in targeting immigrant communities, where a lot of what they're doing is heavily data reliant. To what degree they're using AI, it's hard to tell what's real or just talked about. What exactly is Palantir's role, But there has been within the government a massive breach of data systems that were in data collections that were by statute and common understanding separate and not available for combination and not available for immigration enforcement, that now have all been centralized and being used exactly for that. There's an open question about whether that data, to what degree that data has been sort of also privatized and taken for private purposes, particularly in connection with Doge. I don't know if we're ever going to get an answer on that. But what we do know, at least have some window into, leaving that aside, is bad and frightening enough. Yeah, so for sure there's a problem in that regard too already.
Yeah,
it's not one of the happening in some future. It's our next one right now.
That's scary stuff, Robert. You've been referring to our government as an authoritarian government. And I'm sorry if I'm laughing. I'm because I want to keep thinking that we still have a democracy. But do you feel like right now the way the government's operating is very much like an authoritarian government?
Yeah, I think we have an authoritarian president. It's not an on and off switch. So it's
Mm.
not like we haven't ceded the democracy. We still have elections, and we still have various checks and balances. We just still do have the decentralization of state and federal governments and so on. Um, you and I are having this conversation. I'm saying what I'm saying. There's no one who's coming in to swoop and take me away. So things are on a scale.
Yeah,
Um, and we have a history and institutions that matter. But we
yeah,
also have a top-down authoritarian president and key top aides,
yeah.
who are authoritarian by
Who remains
personality,
unchallenged?
design,
Yeah.
program.
And he's got 3 more years. So that's the other thing is are you worried about the kind of damage that term might do, given especially because President Trump has been very active. That's the other thing is he moves with such speed that I mean we're talking the White House has already been changed in a way that can't be undone. So there's I don't know, there's a recent announcement about how the Kennedy Center is not going to be called the Trump Kennedy Center. I mean these are it just feels like 3 more years of this it's going to be a completely different US. Do you think that what's the point of no return, I guess is my question. When should we be really concerned?
Well, we should be really concerned starting yesterday, but it's not a point of no return. There's always return. And it just depends. However fragile or strong the structure of democracy is, it depends on the people exercising their democratic rights. Even in a total authoritarian system, that's true. People still have power if they engage in collective action. So I don't think it's gone. I do think you're completely right. And we're 1 year down, 3 to go, and even if the velocity slows, which they have no intention of, but the resistance is growing, so things might go slower for them. The country is going to be a much worse and meaner place. The government is going to, is losing tens and hundreds of thousands of staff, governmental employees who have expertise and the ability to do the kinds of things we're talking about. Buildings are being repurposed, agencies are being closed. Yeah, and here in Washington, D.C., as you say, the White House is bizarrely knocked down. It took them one day to change the name on the Kennedy Center. That's one we can easily fix. So we'll get that name off on day one for the next administration, if litigation doesn't take care of it first. But there's a lot more to come, and I think the some of these things that seem symbolic and not nearly as substantive as taking 15 million people off of Medicaid, for example. They are markers of authoritarianism, and the velocity of those is increasing. So the ballroom is not random. That was also a channel for private money, including from the big tech companies, into the administration. The change of the name, the attempt to try to have a Trump coin issued in connection with the 250th anniversary. Yesterday, the day before we're speaking right now, they announced a new class of battleships, which they were going to call the golden battleships, because they figured the best way to get Trump's attention and support is to call anything gold. But they figured out they had an even better idea. It's the Trump class battleships.
Yes.
And so, of course, now Trump's all in. He may not have been, but now he's all in. It's pretty easy to manipulate this guy. Not randomly, these battleships are supposed to be heavily AI enabled. So it directly relates to what we're talking about. And, they may or may not be fantasy or real, but they're certainly going to spend a lot of money going to contractors trying to build them, whether or not they ever get deployed. But anyway, we're seeing this increasing monomania, and it's not separate from the policy agenda. It's part and parcel.
Yeah, let's talk a bit about that, because Besides in government and when it comes to the White House, one of the things that alarms me when it comes to AI is we continuing to innovate, and AI is a very powerful technology, and automation is great, and we are always told that, yeah, the human in the loop, it's happening, but we don't know. We actually have no clue how companies like Palantir are operating, how automation companies are enabling the military. These are all things that are essentially are going to be classified. So we could be building the next nightmare, lethal autonomous machine, and not even know. So what can ordinary citizens, like us, do in a situation where we have no clue how technology is being used by the government, and what kinds of what's the hope there for us when it comes to righting any potential wrongs?
I think there are different aspects to it. Litigation is helping in some of these spaces to either stop things or uncover information. So we can rely on that and some of the open records laws that still apply. We really need Congress to shine a light on this stuff. I think in the spaces you're talking about, there are maybe two categories. One is with Palantir and the sort of surveillance state. I think we can both, it's possible at least, to learn what's going on if we have a new administration or a new Congress that tries to shine a light. And the things that have been happening can be undone. It'll be hard because there's definitely inertia. A new administration will like some of the powers that have been created. And they'll say, we're going to use them for good. And it'll be hard to undo them, but it's doable. And we need to dive in. And certainly, and I think that there are other possible things that are still to come. It seems like the worst abuses in this space are really being used for this immigration crackdown and a mass detention. And if there's a policy shift away from that, then I think it'll be easier to disarm these dangerous tools. But the Pentagon side, though, that's a whole different thing. And the real solution, again, it's going to be hard. We have to make up new solutions because we're going to run out of time. There's been a more than 10-year effort to have a global treaty adopted on killer robots to stop the development and deployment of autonomous weapons. And that's been going along, in global conversations with the U.S. hostile under both Democratic and Republican administrations. Obviously, zero chance of Trump going along with that. But once these things, I think, I don't, there's a lot of use of drone technology, but the real AI-enabled stuff is not quite there. But we're not far. It doesn't seem like we're far. And once it starts to get further along, these treaties are going to be much harder to have people, commit to basically disassemble weapons they've got in stock and not develop them anymore. That's going to be hard. Obviously, all these global treaties have the problem of enforcement and, mutual concern and stuff. But there is a solution, but we're losing time on it, and we may not get there in time.
Do you think that we can use,
as the bigger worries are not so much about like the Terminator scenario. It's just that you're going to have these AI powered things that people claim are going to be super smart, and they're going to make mistakes, just like LLMs make mistakes all the time, in the most complicated scenarios possible. But a battlefield and human cities and stuff. So it's a nightmare scenario, and it's not one that we have really good solutions for once we get there.
I always remain the eternal optimist, and I don't want to say that I think technology is going to be what ends up saving humanity. I don't think it's going to be that, but I think that technology can be a great tool in sustainability, in helping the planet, helping us solve some of the planet's crises, and helping us build more human societies. Do you see AI being used for good in places like the political process or in government?
Well, I don't know. And I think a lot of the uses in general have proven to be kind of overstated so far. But I think that, actually the Biden people did an inventory of all the ways that AI was being used already. This is already a few years ago, so much advanced. And there were tons of like super interesting use cases. Some were very niche. Like one that stuck with me was they were they were using AI tools to identify people who were crossing borders with endangered species. And it's like, okay, I'm for that. That's great if that works.
Yeah.
I think the like in the political space, whether we'll see, like, some of the things that like the day-to-day stuff of people's lives are going to depend on the connection with robotics, which we'll see how it all shakes out. Maybe some of the science fiction stuff turns true. Not sure we're there yet. The thing where it seems like the real high value applications are much nearer term or a more traditional science innovation. So in healthcare, we could solve climate right now without any new technologies, but it doesn't mean we wouldn't benefit by new technologies. And we think that AI could be really helpful in figuring out better ways to harness the sun, more efficient ways to harness the sun and wind, and deal with distribution, maybe some of the battery challenges. Like the big challenge is that for energy sustainability, those are the kinds of things that seem like AI should help with. Maybe AI can figure out how we need less energy used for AI. That would be good.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think, and actually this speaks to a larger kind of question too, which is, do you think that politicians, let's say, people in Congress, do you think that they don't understand this tech well enough to know how to make decisions around it? I mean, do you think that there's an, I don't want to say an education problem, but do you think that, like there's this, you remember back in the day they had, Mark Zuckerberg was being, he was put on the stand, and he, they were asking him questions, and some of the questions, he was laughing because they didn't really make sense. And it was obvious that the senator at the time wasn't really asking the right question. Do you think that that's part of the problem, is that our Congress doesn't really understand technology well enough to help make good decisions about it and regulate it? Or do you think that there's a deeper problem than that?
I think there's something to that. I mean, this is a really new area that's fast moving, has endless complications and is hard to keep up with. I do think, you're correct in identifying the ChatGPT 3.0 moment. Like that was a moment for society. It was like this mind-blowing moment for people who had not sort of seen earlier versions to see the power of this, and it's kind of the magic of LLMs, and it definitely grabbed Congress, and there was a lot of interest, and there was a commitment, and there was like a 6-month window of real, wasn't like everything was lovey-dovey, but there was bipartisan interest in trying to get their heads around what was going on and trying to learn about it. And also, everybody was very mindful of what you're talking about. They didn't want to look stupid again. So I think they did, there was a little window of a lot of conversations, a lot of high-level briefings, some of which were public and a lot of which weren't, many of which were bipartisan. And I think a lot of them learned a lot. I think they probably already forgot a lot, and also things have changed since then.
Yeah.
So for sure, they don't know enough. And one thing is, maybe different about AI than some other technologies is, if you're dealing with airplanes, say, like most people in Congress, including me, don't know a whole lot about airplane technology. But the people on the transportation committee tend to get pretty much in the weeds. AI is everything. So it's not just specialized. It's not just there's one committee that could learn about it. There's one set of people who could sort of delve into it. That said, I don't think, yes, there's a huge gap. They need to know more. The staff need to know more. They need to understand the intersection of AI with whatever issue they're working on. And there's no way for them to know enough, and they don't. I still don't think that's the main issue at all. I think the main issue is, that doesn't explain why there's no congressional legislation, one piece of modest congressional legislation dealing with internet deepfakes. That's it. That's not why. It's because, we have a Congress that is owned by big money interests and a Republican Party that is not just owned, but ideologically committed, even in ways that are, I think plainly self-defeating, to opposing regulation. So there was a little window where they were kind of open on it, and they clamped down. And as we're seeing more money pour in from big tech, and they're making commitments now to spend astronomical amounts of money. Of course, Musk already did in the last election cycle personally. But the companies are now preparing to spend hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, they'll get what they pay for. And it's always easier to stop something in Congress than to get it passed. So winning the preemption they want will be hard for them. But preventing meaningful federal regulation, they're in the driver's seat for that for a long time to come.
Well, I think in 2026, we're going to see this question of AI regulation come front and center. And it's already looking like it's gearing up for that. Do you think that AI regulation is becoming the new culture war proxy?
No, I mean, I don't think it's going to be at the level of kind of generalized public awareness as some of the culture war issues have been. But the other thing is, I sort of wish it would play out that way.
Yeah.
And we're certainly trying to elevate attention to it. It's not going to cut the way the culture war issues do. It is not going to cut Republican, Democrat at all from the grassroots up. Like, forget the politicians, but from the grassroots up, there's tons of poll data already that bipartisan, nonpartisan, transpartisan, whatever, everybody wants to see controls on AI. They may not know very much about it, but they're worried about it. And I think we're seeing a real surge in parental concern. People still don't totally know how their kids are using it, except to cheat on tests or essays. But these the real life, there's some fraction that's a substantial fraction of children who are engaged in these real relationships with AI, and I don't think parents know much about that at all. But they're starting to learn about it, if not, and be scared about it, and demand responses. And that has nothing to do with partisan affiliation. In fact, we're partnering with quite conservative groups for pushing for regulation. I do think there's going to be a surge on that in the States in 2026. I don't think it's going to be, again, I don't think it'll map, some like anything at all, like a fight over trans kids' rights or anything like that. But I do think there's going to be a lot of bipartisan effort. And by the way, all of the AI regulation has moved in the States, has moved on a bipartisan basis. There might be one or two things in California that haven't, because California is basically a one-party state. But we've worked in every state on intimate deepfakes and political deepfakes. And in every case where a law has been passed, it's passed on a bipartisan basis.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. And I think that I wish that more people were involved when it comes to this, because AI regulation is going to be incredibly important. This is one of the most important and biggest technological leaps that we've had. And we started off this episode. I was a little antagonistic, Robert. I kind of wanted to get started on a hot note, but that argument of we need to maintain national competitiveness and we got to keep the innovation going. That does not mean that we should not put the brakes on this tech in a way that makes sure that it doesn't harm us more than it helps us. And I love that you mentioned, talking about children and making sure that we guide the usage of AI by children and make sure that there's age appropriateness. And we really do need to, I don't want to say it's not halting innovation, but we certainly need to be mindful about how we do it so that we don't create more harm than good. And you talked about AI girlfriends. I mean, there's also a mental health epidemic that I think is forming now as people start to form relationships with LLMs. And all of that is going to need some kind of regulation that's well thought out. And I think you're absolutely right. I think getting the states to be able to form their own regulation is going to, in the long run, help, because states can learn from each other, from the different use cases, and this idea of it's just going to create patchwork of laws. Well, that's not a bad thing. We do want to make sure that we get all of the bases covered. I want to kind of first of all, I want to thank you for
on the patchwork, just real quick on the patchwork. So I think 48 states now have laws on intimate deepfakes, so non-consensual. These are, it's like way more than 99% are targeting women and girls. It doesn't really happen to boys and men too much.
Yeah,
and more than 90% are kids. So this is really a problem about sort of, creating authentic looking deepfakes of an identifiable person. So they're a nude or engaged in a sexual act that's unreal, but looks real. It has a massive effects on people's psyches, right? Yeah, on their mental health. Like, it's really bad problem. Yes. And 48 states have passed laws. That's a patchwork because the laws aren't all the same. So what? I mean, in what way does the narrow difference, whether it's whether the sentence for violating the law is 90 days or 100 days, or the exact definition of what constitutes an intimate deepfake varies from Wyoming to Michigan? It doesn't matter. So the Patrick thing is also like massively overstated. There's basically a national standard because every state's adopted a rule, and it basically means
Yeah.
don't do non-consensual intimate deepfakes. Like, yeah, if you're in this, if you want to get towards the line, you better be careful because it's gonna that will matter if there's a criminal prosecution. But basically, don't do it. So the Patrick is like, yeah, there's a Patrick, but actually, effectively, there's a national standard. So even then, the Patrick thing is again another element of how it's overblown is a concern.
Yeah. What's one thing that we all should be looking out for in 2026 in with what's happening right now, with what Trump's doing, that we all need to be aware of and participate in? I'm a believer in that, we should be able to take action. What action would you advise people to take nowadays so that we don't end up being victims of all of this?
Well, I think maybe two top things to think about. One is the political spending of the big tech companies. It's going to be unlike anything it's ever been before. They've already signaled that, so it's a near certainty. And sort of watching that and holding politicians accountable for taking big tech money, making them renounce that spending. Because it's going to be a brain line thing. Are you with them or not? That's what they're demanding. So we should demand that they're on the side of people, not the corporations. And I think really thinking about like this is a corporate versus people issue. It's not really a tech issue. I'm not saying for or against AI. It's nothing to do with that. It's like, do the companies get to decide or do we get to decide? And then as a cutting edge issue, I think what we've just been talking about, the use of AI, the spread of AI companions and the state efforts to regulate them, I think is going to be probably the hot button issue in AI state regulatory policy in 2026.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Robert, for joining us on the show and for bringing your excellent political insights. Really appreciate what you're doing at Public Citizen. It's really great to have an organization like yours. Watch out for the rights of humans and make sure that we, that corruption doesn't take hold and destroy us all. So really appreciate you bringing your insights on the show. Thank you so much.
It's great to be with you. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, fantastic.